Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into a completely groundbreaking paradigm shift based on the work of Dr. Mohammed Tayyib Khoidry. Now, for centuries, right, the Arabic language has been treated kind of like a static, sacred heritage, guarded almost like a priceless museum exhibit. But what we're looking at today is how to completely transform Arabic. We want to take it from being this heavily protected relic and turn it into a dynamic, fully engineerable system that's literally built for modern science and artificial intelligence.
Let's jump right in with this really fascinating metaphor that Dr. Khoidry uses. He calls it the spoiled child. So think about a spoiled child, surrounded by excessive care, shielded from the harsh friction of the real world, totally protected from making any mistakes. Well, what actually happens? I mean, sure, they don't break, but they also don't grow strong. And historically, by overprotecting Arabic from these perceived errors, its guardians kind of accidentally stunted its natural social maturation.
So think about the stark contrast between these two linguistic realities. On the one hand, you've got a living, thriving language, and it grows precisely because it gets out there, it goes to the market, interacts with the streets, and it actually thrives on making productive errors. But on the other side, you have the spoiled language. It gets treated like a museum piece, completely frozen in history, and totally isolated from modern scientific developments. And honestly, this contrast right here is the core problem we need to solve.
Section 1. The Trap of Strategic Fear.
Okay, let's look at how this whole situation actually built up chronologically. Way back during the era of revelation, Arabic was incredibly flexible. It was in this living state of absolute dialectical openness. But then, as imperial expansion really took hold, it rapidly shifted into becoming a global administrative tool for a massive empire. And finally, we hit the era of codification. Faced with millions of new, non-native speakers, the cultural mind basically panicked. So instead of engineering this newly global language, they resorted to some really rigid institutional policing.
So you gotta ask, who actually locked the language in this golden cage? Well, it was actually this unspoken alliance of four really powerful forces. You had religious practitioners who wanted to protect the foundational texts. Then, the state needed a unified administrative standard. Scientists, they desired absolute control. And finally, there was just this intense fear of dissolving into non-Arab cultures. And the crazy thing is, together, all these good intentions ended up creating this strategic fear that completely froze Arabic's generative capabilities for centuries.
Section 2. From Museum to Laboratory. To actually break free from this, Dr. Khoidry urges us to totally redefine our core terms. We really need to start seeing Arabic not as this single rigid essence, but rather as a series of adaptable linguistic outputs. Basically, when we look at historical texts, we shouldn't be seeing them as eternal standards that dictate exactly how we have to speak today. Instead, they're more like an open laboratory of past solutions, stuff that we can learn from and actually build upon.
And this completely changes how we evaluate the language itself. See, in the old system, Arabic was judged by a really strict moral and legal standard. It was essentially driven by a fear of making a grammatical mistake. But if we move to an engineering system, a sentence is judged by information entropy. You basically ask yourself, does this sentence use way too much linguistic energy to produce very little meaning? A scientific sentence needs to be built kind of like an electrical circuit. Any excess verbiage just burns out the meaning. So we're moving from judging things as strictly right or wrong to judging them on clear, frictionless transmission.
Which brings us to a really crucial concept, the right to productive error. Look, in engineering, an error isn't some moral flaw or corruption of identity. No, it's a vital, generative stage of learning. It is literally data creation. If we don't allow a language to stumble and make productive errors in daily use, we are completely stripping it of its ability to adapt to new scientific horizons.
Section 3. Engineering Linguistic Thinking.
So here is the pedagogical sociolinguistic model. This is what actually guides us step by step to link that heritage to living usage. Step 1 is the textual layer, where we extract flexible operational rules from history. Step 2 is collective cognition, actually analyzing how society receives the language. Step 3 is social practice. This is where we test these ideas in daily conversational life before we ever codify them. And finally, step 4 is engineering, creating open, continuously revisable computational frameworks based on all that real on-the-ground usage.
And what's amazing is we can actually map these ancient Arab operating systems straight onto modern computational needs. Dr. Khoidry identifies 3 historical protocols. First, the Protocol of Clarity, which focused on linear eloquence. But then we got the protocol of networks with scholars like Al-Jurjani. He shifted to the mathematics of relationships between words, which is essentially early graph theory. How cool is that? And finally, the protocol of pragmatics, which treated language as a cybernetic input to generate factual outputs. So by harnessing these ancient protocols, we can actually program modern systems.
Section 4. Digital Arabic and AI.
Now, if we want to build a truly sovereign, highly capable Arabic AI, we can't just feed it ancient poetry and rigid grammar books. We need a data set that reflects living usage. Just think about the ideal breakdown for a digital Arabic corpus. It's proposed as 40% academic, but then a massive 30% media and 30% social network data. We absolutely must include pluralistic social usage. We're talking dialects, digital shorthand, the actual, messy way people interact, if we want to train models that truly understand the living language.
And to process all that massive, diverse data, the project introduces a genuinely brilliant concept: interlingual within one language, or IWL for short. Think of IWL as an operational layer. It treats differences within Arabic, like, say, shifting from a classical text to a modern digital post, as if they were transitions between entirely adjacent languages. So instead of forcing a rigid right or wrong rule on the text, IWL preserves what are called zones of undecidability. It's training the AI to understand context and friction as built-in structural features.
So, inside is Sovereign Arabic Language Model. This is exactly how IWL handles all the chaos of modern digital Arabic. First, the AI infers the perceptual state of the text. Then it proposes appropriate transition paths. And finally, activates specific semantic engines. And here's the absolute genius part of this. The model is rewarded for transitional path integrity rather than your traditional normative accuracy. It essentially learns to navigate the dynamic, living system of the language intuitively, exactly like a native speaker would.
Section 5. The Guide to Invention.
To truly liberate this kind of strategic thinking, we can actually look back to the philosopher Ibn Rushd and his concept of the guide to invention. See, for centuries, Arabic scholarship really prioritized the guide to teaching, which was simply proving and transmitting what is already known. But the guide to invention is entirely different. It is a cognitive mechanism focused purely on the method of generating new ideas. It demands mental experimentation. It breaks the authority of a completed heritage, and it literally forces us to produce the future.
Now, applying this requires a final, massive mental shift. We really have to abandon the traditional idea of the forgiven error. That's where a mistake is just seen as an excused exception, sort of swept under the rug just to maintain community stability. Instead, we have to replace it with productive error. In an engineering framework, an error is a structural, generative condition. It is the absolute requirement for horizon expansion. Simply put, without productive error, there is absolutely no invention.
Which leaves us with one final, pretty provocative question. Are we protecting the language of the past or engineering the language of the future? Because really, we cannot do both. If we just manage language through fear, we keep it locked in a museum. But if we embrace linguistic outputs, productive error, and computational engineering, Arabic becomes a massive generative force in the age of AI. So think about how you interact with language every single day. Are you guarding it, or are you actually growing it? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer.